busy. Chipping away at the edge. This is an order.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
Oh, that's cute. Like a day off. You know, I think it's just mostly
Yes, you have the extras. No, you had the whole big one.
not taking with you. You're gonna have your summer. Yeah. My husband's receiving salary
Right, this is our
rest. Did next week on the 7th. So I'm taking that day. It's 200 bucks in Business County Hospital. Oh yeah. Yeah. His second salary.
You know, sitting up there? Oh, it's probably you. So I saw him.
That'll be done.
Yeah. We're going to prohibit
Monday. Monday. Just July.
well, there, the other speech is still subject to enforcement. So what doing the thing changes how the board considers what kind of public forum you are.
So, I wish I had those.
In terms of the court,
So,
designated public forum, which we are now, which is like a city street, you prohibit viewpoint speech. Several other transit agencies have become a limited public forum, which then gives you the broader powers to define what speech you can do. So it's it's in response to a number of different very controversial ads that
I happened to run into she said she's so lucky.
Okay, so I think Bob usually sits there, right? So Bob, Mike, right?
Mike is gonna.
Good morning. I'd like to open the Audit Committee meeting for the month of April. We have one public speaker, Murray Bowden, concerned grandparents. Is this on?
Morning, Jim. Morning, everybody. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Malcolm Gladwell said if you want to do something right, you got to do it 10,000 times. I'm well committee meetings of various places. I'm particularly interested in a Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority because that was created by Robert Moses. Yes, Neil, he's the worst thing that happened to New York City. Don't shake your head, I watch. I can get to do anything I want in this meeting and talk any way I want because nobody watches the video. When I get to the meeting, the board meeting, I have to behave myself. Here I don't have to. Robert Moses was the worst thing that happened to New York City, and when he did it, everybody thought he was doing the right thing. Most of what we're doing now is unwinding what he did. He set in motion a fixation of the mind that he was the God, and he wasn't. The further into the book I get, the more I know that he did New York City a great disservice. Our job now is to unwind what he did. There are people that are doing an excellent job. You've got the waterfront, you've got Battery Park, you've got a whole walkway going around Manhattan. It's still called a Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority for a reason. He set it up so you can't get rid of it. Unwinding it is incredibly difficult. There are parts of the MTA that are moving forward very well. Some parts are not. My job is to point out who's going forward and who's not. One last comment. What's very important is who's paying attention to me these days. I watch.
Thank you. I need a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting in January. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, Mike, why don't you go over our work plan going forward?
Sure, Jim. The June meeting will include a discussion of the implication of GASB 67 and 68 to the accounting and financial reporting of pension plans for the MTA. Also, and we will have a enterprise risk management update that will be presented in June instead of this meeting by Lamont Kurz, our chief compliance officer. I'm sorry. The next line. That's right. Additionally, the meetings in January, April, and September, we will have the Chief Diversity Officer, Michael Gardner, attend those meetings to discuss his compliance monitoring and performance measures. The regular agenda for the next meeting on June 24th will also include a briefing by Deloitte on the results of their review of the first quarter of 2015, consolidated financial statements, the single audit report, the investment compliance report, and the 2014 management letter reports. Also, I will brief the committee on the status of our 2015 audit plan results as well. That's it, Jim.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, we will discuss the draft financial statements from the external auditors. Mike and team.
John, get the podium camera off me. Put it on.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
This morning we laid in front of you our formal communications to you as a result of the audit. You have previously received the draft financial statements electronically. We're prepared to answer any questions you might have on those as well, but I'm going to concentrate my communication to you this morning on the document we handed out to you. Our audit of the financial statements was done in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and also government auditing standards as it relates to the single audit of the MTA's operations. The various entities that we did do the audit of included the overall consolidated financial statements of the MTA, the consolidated financial statements of the New York City Transit Authority, First Mutual Transit Assurance Company, Long Island Railroad Company, Metro North Commuter Railroad, MTA Bus Company, Staten Island Transit Operating Authority, and the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. All those financial statements contain unmodified opinions on the financial statements, so in the old terminology, they are clean, unqualified opinions. We do have emphasis of matter paragraphs as it relates to the fact that you are subsidized by the state of New York and the city, from a standpoint of the subsidies that you receive, so you are somewhat dependent upon those entities. However, they are, again, in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. As a part of our audit, we do look at internal controls as it relates to the financial statements. We're looking to determine whether or not there are any control deficiencies that might have a material weakness that would have a material impact on those financial statements. As a result of our audit, there are no material weaknesses. There are no significant deficiencies as a result of our audit. As Mr. Fusilli mentioned earlier, in June we will present our management letter to you with our other comments as it relates to efficiencies and improvements in internal controls. But again, there's nothing to report of anything that's of any material nature as it relates to those internal controls. In doing our audit, we are looking at risks. We had shared with you previously what we deem to be the major focus of the scope of our audit. We also had shared with you what we deem to be the risks of material misstatement in the financial statements. As a result of our audit, there were no changes on our audit plan. But if you look at the bottom of page 2, you will note the significant accounting estimates that we do look at, and I'll just reiterate those for you. We do look at the fair market value of your financial instruments. That includes the actual investments that you have, as well as the interest rate swaps that you have. The allowance for doubtful accounts. We look at the depreciable lives of capital assets. We are checking to make sure you have accruals necessary for accrued expenses and other liabilities. The other post-employment benefit liabilities, that's the actual, healthcare related piece, but we're also looking at the pension obligations that you have. Estimated liabilities to injured persons, your incurred but not reported reserves for self-insurance. We're looking at environmental accruals and contingencies, your pension liabilities, your claims and judgments, derivative instruments, hedging instruments, and any impairment of capital assets. This past year, there were no changes in the methodology that was used by management in determining those significant estimates, and also there were no changes in accounting principles or policies this past year as it relates to the financials. So everything is still accounted for consistently between 2013 and 2014. As a result of our audit, there were no uncorrected misstatements, so there were no adjustments that we had recommended to management, nor are there any significant past adjustments where there would be things that we might bring to management's attention that was not material to the financial statements. So again, it was a clean audit from that perspective. We had no disagreements with management. We received the full cooperation of management in being able to get our audit done in the timetable that we expected, and there were no other items that I would bring to your attention from that standpoint. Included in your package are the management representation letters. On each of the audits, we do receive a representation letter from management where they're affirming to us everything that in writing that would be consistent with auditing standards from that perspective. Be glad to answer any questions you might have as it relates to those items.
Any questions? Chuck?
In the normal course of a public corporation, I would ask you the following. Have you received full cooperation of management and access to all documents and records and information that you have?
Yes, sir. There was nothing where we felt our scope was limited.
Do you believe that there is any need for or appropriateness of a private meeting with members of the board in order to give them any additional assurances or information?
No, sir.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? I have a couple. The financial statements of the agencies vary in their presentation. And for the last 10 years anyway, we've been trying to get this to be one MTA. The question is, do you see in the future that our presentations for all of the agencies will be similar so that we can look at them, and or is because of what they do, or that make it that they could never be perfectly symmetrical.
One of the things that we have discussed with Pat, and I haven't had a chance really to discuss it with Bob yet, but I will, is that we will sit down with management at the end of the audit, and we will share with them observations as to how perhaps the management discussion and analysis could be more made consistent, how the financial statement presentation might be, and also some of the footnotes. Each of the entities are a little bit different, but in a lot of cases, their investment policies, their, disclosures of investments could be put together in a more streamlined manner, and that will be one of the items in our management letter that we will discuss with them.
Will the PeopleSoft upgrade help in that?
I don't know, from a financial statement disclosure standpoint, I don't know that it will, but I do believe, from a standpoint of being able to prepare consolidated financial statements and have consistent chart of accounts and things of that nature, that it would be of assistance.
Well, you remember, I'd go back when they had them on a spreadsheet.
Right.
The question is, PeopleSoft helped a little, but it's important as a lot of the people that sit on our board are novices. They don't naturally look at a financial statement on an everyday basis. So if we can make them pretty much alike, it'd be much easier for them to follow. That was the only reason for my question. The other question is, during 2014, to what extent was inventory written off for obsolescence, receivable written off as uncollectible?
Defer to Pat on that. We do look at those items as it relates to the audit, but as specific amounts, I guess I would defer to management.
There were no material write-offs of inventory or receivables, to my knowledge.
Okay.
Put it on his laptop. But he wants it there.
Okay, I need a motion to accept the audit as presented. Can I get a second? All in favor? All in favor? Any against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, the next thing on the agenda is going to be management giving us a summary of their consolidated. I think we have a.
Yeah. Bring the screen down. Drop the front screen down. Drop the front screen down, John.
Okay, good morning. This morning I'm going to present a management review of the consolidated financial 14. This material is on the director's desk. I think it's closer, yeah, like that. Okay. Yeah, okay, this material, yep. Okay. Yep. So this material director's desk, I think it's item number 5, and it was also mailed out to the committee members last week. Okay, so during the year at the Finance Committee, you receive a review of the operating results based on the financial plan, but we never really take a look at the balance sheet, the MTA's balance sheet. So this morning I want to do a high-level review of the 2014 consolidated balance sheet, or as it's called today, the Statement of Net Position. I want to review any significant changes that have occurred in our assets, liabilities, and net position. Next, I'm going to review our revenues and expenses and explain to you how that affects our net position. And then finally, I want to tie it all together and explain to you how the financial plan results for 2014 reconcile to the audited financial statements. Okay, on page 1, the MTA's consolidated financial statements are prepared in conformance with GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, and within GAAP, we use the Government Accounting Standard Board's pronouncements. So you'll see reference to the term GASB throughout the presentation. GASB are the accounting pronouncements that are applicable to government entities. So the consolidated financial statements include the financial results of all 7 of the MTA agencies, including FIMTAC. So there are 5 sections. The sections are the MD&A, Management Discussion and Analysis, the basic financial statements, which would be Statement of Net Position, Statement of Revenues, Expenses, and Changes in Net Position, and the Consolidated Statement of Cash Flows. We have the notes to the financials, and then we have 2 required supplemental information schedules required by GASB, and those present the MTA's funding progress on our pension plans and our OPEB obligations. And then finally, we have an additional supplementary reconciliation, which is required by the New York State Controller, which reconciles the February financial plan final estimate to the audited financial statements.
To what extent
Excuse
To
me?
what extent are the several agencies fully funded or underfunded?
Commissioner Murder, we have a specific chart to talk about that, so we'll go through this presentation. It's a long presentation, we'll go through it, but there's a specific chart where we talk about that and can give you all the information.
As usual, perfect. Thanks.
Yep, okay. Okay, taking a look at the MTA's balance sheet, we have, it's now called the Statement of Net Position. We have our assets, liabilities, and of course the difference between assets and liabilities are our net position. So taking a look at a condensed version of our assets, we have our capital assets of $59 billion, which is 86% of our total assets. They increased $2.3 billion for the year. Other assets increased $287 million, and deferred outflows of resources increased by $86 million. Taking a look at the breakdown of our capital assets, we have land, construction in progress, building structures, bridges and tunnels, passenger cars, locomotives, buses, infrastructure, and other. And you can see there the changes in the various categories. The biggest change was in other. Next is some of the significant capital projects that caused the increase in our capital assets for the year. And of course, the biggest one is our mega projects, East Side Access, 2nd Avenue Subway, Fulton Street, number 7 line extension. Okay, next, moving to, yep.
On the diminution of the assets attributable to the bus fleet, is that because the bus fleet has deteriorated, or there's less of them?
No, there's a schedule in the back on page 17, which does basically a walkthrough. Actually, it's on page 16. It does a walkthrough of our capital assets.
Oh, I can wait for that then.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a long presentation, and there is a lot of really good material that Pat's put together that will answer these questions. So if you will allow us to just defer responses. And if, again, we don't address what you need, we will address it at that point.
Okay. Okay, next we're taking a look at the balance of our assets. So we have other assets and deferred outflows. Other assets and deferred outflows for the year were $9.5 billion. They increased $373 million. Most of that increase is in other assets, and that's attributable primarily to increased advances to our pension plans. So we advanced $321 million to our pension plans this year, and under GAAP accounting, that's recorded as an advance to the pension plans.
Let me just say, what that means is we are pre-funding our obligation under pension plans, so we have put significant amounts, primarily in the Long Island additional pension plan. But because accounting, they don't treat it as we've already funded it, they treat it as an advance that will go against the future requirement. But basically, the money's there, it's earning, it's working, it's doing exactly what we want it to do.
Bob, that takes me back to the question I asked earlier. To what extent are we fully funded, taking into account the pre-funding, or not taking it into account?
We have a schedule on that. We'll get to that. That's coming up.
The additional funding we're doing is basically doubled our funding level for the additional pension plan for Long Island Railroad. But we'll show that.
So that you, unlike the state of New Jersey, we are seeking to pre-fund, is that correct?
Okay, moving to liabilities and deferred inflows. Our total liabilities and deferred inflows for the year ended 2014 were $55.3 billion, an increase of $3.6 billion, and that's attributable to two major categories. We had increased debt, net debt of $1.1 billion, and there's a schedule on page 17 which does a roll forward of all our new debt issues, our retirements, and our refundings. The next area is the other post-employment benefits liability. That increased by $2 billion, and basically that difference represents the annual required contribution per our actuary, which is what we show in our operating expense, less the amount that we actually funded. So we actually funded $484 million, which is the amount that we pay for the retiree health care cost. For 2014, we did not contribute any additional amounts to our OPEB trust. We did in 2012 and 2013. Okay, next we'll move to our net position. Net position, again, is the difference between our assets and our liabilities. Under GASB, we show our net position basically as net investment for capital assets. We show our restricted net positions and our unrestricted net position. So total net position is $13.3 billion. It decreased $923 million for the year. The net investment in capital assets increased by $924 million as a result of increased capital asset purchases offset by the increase in our debt. Net position for debt service decreased by $44 million. Net position for claims decreased by $32 million. Net position for other purposes increased by $105, and our unrestricted net position decreased by $1.9 billion, and that's due primarily to the unfunded OPEB liability of $2 billion. Okay, next we'll take a look at our revenues and expenses for the year. So our operating revenues increased by $271 million to $7.9 billion. Our total operating expense increased by $840 million to $15.8. Our operating deficit was $7.8 billion, an increase of $569 million over last year. Then we add to that our subsidies and tax revenue and other non-operating revenue of $6.5 billion, which is an increase of $380 million over the prior year. We subtract from that our interest expense, which is $1.3 billion, which is pretty much almost exactly the same as last year, which is pretty amazing considering we issued another $1.1 billion of debt. So this reflects all the refundings that our finance department does to take advantage of the lower interest rates. That brings us to a deficit before revenues from capital grants and appropriations, a deficit of $2.6 billion, an increase of $190 million over last year. Then we have our capital grants and appropriations of $1.7 billion. That's an increase of $189 million over last year. And that brings us to a total change in net position of $923 million for the year, almost exactly the same as the change in net position for the prior year. So we add that to our beginning net position, we come down to our ending net position of $13.2 billion. Okay, the next page, we have just some of the explanations for the increases in revenues and expenses. And these are pretty much the same as the explanations that were reviewed at the February Finance Committee meeting, so I'm not going to go through those. Next, we have the consolidated cash flows. Our cash from operating activities was a negative $3.8 billion. Net cash flow from non-capital financing activities, which is our tax subsidies and tax revenues, that was $6.2 billion, an increase of $527 over last year. Then we have our net cash from capital and related financing. So that's the outflows for our capital purchases, offset by our borrowings and our grants for capital grants and appropriations. Next, we have cash from investing activities, which was positive $210 million for the year, to bring us to a net decrease in cash of $47 million for the year, bringing us to an end-of-year cash balance of $311 million. Okay, next we have our required supplementary information. We have our funding progress on our single employer pension plan. So we have 3 single employers. We have the Long Island Railroad plan for additional pensions. We have the MAPSTOA pension plan and the Metro-North cash balance plan. Combined, there's a total unfunded liability of $2 billion. That's a slight improvement over last year, $171 million improvement. The funded ratio for those 3 plans is 55% combined. What's not reflected here, because our actuarial valuation is done at the beginning of the year, we contributed an additional $295 million to the Long Island Railroad additional plan during fiscal year 14. So if that was included, that would increase the funded ratio for the Long Island Railroad plan up to 47%. So currently it's 29%. That additional funding would bring it up to 47%.
Let me just talk about that one. That's a closed plan. There are no new entrants into that plan, and that has been probably one of the biggest it really is it is a burden to the Long Island Railroad financial statements. It's an old plan, it's costly. We have a schedule that we have been following, actuarial schedule, to amortize that past cost. What we've been doing is putting additional monies, basically using the excess real estate revenues as in with your direction and your consent, and funding that. So that plan, which was 24% funded, is now almost 47, almost 50% funded. And our goal is to continue to take extra one-shot revenues when we get them and put them into that plan. Every time we do that, that effectively saves us what the actuarial requirement of 7% to fund would do. So it's a smart move, it's the best use of our money, but these are the plans that we control. Now, all of those plans we are fully funding according to the actuarially required contribution. We are doing the ARC. So we're being very prudent. We're not borrowing against the plans, which the state law would enable you to do, which is actually what the state of New York is doing. You know, we're not doing that. We are funding our requirement every single year, and we're putting additional funds into this. So these are just the plans that we control. This has not, it's not talking about NYSERS, which obviously the city controls, or NYSLRS, which the state controls. And in both of those situations, we're paying exactly what they tell us to pay, which is our requirement. So I would just say, from a fiscal standpoint, we are much more conservative than most people are. We are doing what we're supposed to do. We're ahead of schedule, and that's our commitment to continue to do it.
How many members are there in the closed Long Island plan?
I want to say maybe 800. I will get you the exact number, but there's not a lot of members still in it. The Long Island Railroad?
Can't hear you.
Not retired as of yet. 250 still in.
250 in?
Still, and Rich, do you know how many are the total? Okay.
How
We
many of those
basic,
are eligible? How many of those are eligible to retire at this time? Most of them.
Chuck, Commissioner Murdler, the total cost of that plan is about $120 million a year, I think. Of that, about $100 million is past cost. I mean, so we are already paying almost the full brunt of everybody who's in that plan or could retire. And I think as Rich said, it's a closed plan and was closed many decades ago. And so basically, if you're still working here, you could probably retire any time now. So I view that as something we really want to fund and do it.
I don't disagree, and I don't fault you in any way for what you're doing, in any way whatsoever. My concern is just to be sure that, unlike certain jurisdictions, we are doing those things that will not get either Pew or anyone else to say that we are not doing the optimum that we can and should be doing to adequately fund the plans.
Again, I will say, before we made these advances, as are reported by the GAAP accounting, we were funding exactly what we were told we needed to do actuarially to make sure we can fulfill our obligation to all the retirees. We're now almost doubling what we're required to do in putting the money aside. So we're being very, very conservative and cautious, and I think taking care of something that was underfunded in the past. We're taking care of it now.
Good, thank you.
Okay, just continuing on that supplementary pension schedule, a couple of items to note. This schedule is for our single employer plans. It does not include the three cost-sharing multiple employer plans, which would be the New York City Employees Retirement Plan, the New York State Local Employees Retirement Plan, and the MTA Defined Benefit Plan. So those three plans, there's a new accounting rule coming out next year, GASB 68, which Deloitte talked about. And under GASB 68, these unfunded liabilities, so for the single employer plans, the $2 billion, for the other three plans, the unfunded liability is approximately $6 or $7 billion. Those will become liabilities on the MTA's balance sheet. So that's going to be a significant change to our balance sheet next year.
Ratio funding.
I don't know exactly. The New York State plan, I believe, is about at least 75% funded, and I think the New York City plan is somewhere between 60 or 70% funded. But I'll get you an answer on that.
Would you? Thanks.
Yeah.
With respect to Mr. Foran's comment about not asking questions, can we find out at least when, maybe some detail on that 68 rule? I'd love to understand why we're adding the liability, what's changed, either the ruling or with us. Just good to know.
Yeah, I think at an upcoming meeting we're going to do a complete overview and explain to you how that works and how it's going to affect our financial statements.
Is there the one-sentence version of it that we could walk away today with?
Yeah, the one sentence. The Accounting Standards Board is requiring everybody to do this. We've already been doing it in what we think is the fiscally responsible way, and we will continue to do it the fiscally responsible way, but this just has to do with how you report it and now how it's reflected on the balance sheet. And that is one really long sentence, and I apologize for that.
No, that was acceptable, and so you're saying it's an off-balance sheet item right now, and it'll be an on-balance sheet?
Correct,
Okay.
definitely.
Correct, yeah.
The efficiency of consultants is just amazing.
Okay, the next supplementary schedule is our funding of our post-employment benefit plan, which is we refer to as OPEB. Now, the numbers there are the same for 2013 and 2014 because the actuarial evaluation is done every 2 years, so the numbers have not changed. We did contribute to a separate trust for fiscal years 12 and 13. We did not contribute anything in 14. The value of the trust at 12/31/14 is $325 million, and that will be reflected in the next action, which will be in 2015. In addition, the MTA has earmarked an additional $147 million that's in our investments on our balance sheet. So those monies are on our balance sheet. They have not been contributed to the trust yet. Okay, and finally, we have a reconciliation of our financial plan final estimate to our GAAP-based statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. So we see on the operating revenues, our the financial statement revenues were $75 million less than the financial plan estimate. The operating expenses in the financial statements, the final financials were 136 lower than the financial plan estimate, resulting in a net operating deficit on the financial plan of $7.8 billion, which is $61 million lower than the financial plan estimate, which comes down to about 0.7%. So I think actually we did pretty good in terms of tracking to what the financial plan estimate was. Next, we come down to our subsidies and other non-operating revenue. The audited financial statements are $331 million higher than the subsidies reflected in the financial plan. The financial plan next, it brings the deficit down to a cash basis. So what we have is we have the financial plan debt service, which includes interest and principal, whereas in the GAAP financials, we only include interest expense in there. The principal is offset on the balance sheet against our liabilities. And then we have a conversion to cash basis, which basically the $4.3 billion is we're adding back the non-cash expense items like depreciation of $2.3 billion, the unfunded OPEB of $2 billion, and unfunded pollution remediation expense of $0.7. So by adding that back, the financial plan comes down to a cash surplus, whereas in the financial statements on an accrual GAAP basis, we come down to a $2.6 billion deficit. And on the next page, we have explanations for the various ins and outs of what differences.
Let me just make a point there. Our financial plan is based on our statutory requirement to be self-sufficient, self-funded, okay, which means that we are doing it on a cash basis. GAAP accounting requires us to recognize all expenses, whether they're cash expenses or not. So depreciation is mentioned. The fact that OPEB is an obligation that we have, but it's not fully funded. We only fund the current measure as we're required. So that's why we're always going to have a difference. But I think what we're really, the point we want to leave you with is in all other areas, we are following very good accounting standards in the way we keep our books, okay? Meaning we're not failing to recognize expenses when they come along. We're not, advancing income that we shouldn't. So that earlier point of only a $61 million difference between our financial plan in terms of operation and GAAP accounting on our balance, we're really following things and doing them the right way. The big differences are the fact that statutorily we don't have to recover depreciation. Statutorily we don't have to recover this OPEB expense, which is our future liability. We acknowledge it and we're trying to do it. So that's the difference, but I just think that the audit committee should really recognize and appreciate the fact that on the operating side, we are very, very, very close to true GAAP accounting in what we recognize.
Okay, well, that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions.
I would ask the question I asked about 20 minutes ago, which was, how do you account for the lessening of the value of the bus fleet? Is it that they've gotten older, or there's less of them, or they're not being maintained, or how would you characterize that?
Well, the number that's shown on that schedule is a net number, so that's the amount we spent for buses less the depreciation we incurred for the year. So looking at the schedule on page 16, it looks like we purchased buses for about $34 million, but we had depreciation expense of 186. So it's kind of a net number. So that's how it's reflected on the balance sheet. So really, the
depreciated,
buses are
that's
being depreciated faster than we're replacing them.
That's the answer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Right.
That's for sure.
Well, we knew that, yeah.
Patty? When you, going back to slide 2, when you characterize the growth of other, could you please explain to us now in some detail what other is?
Yes, other is mostly transit authority, and for this year, that represents the capitalization of the number 7 line extension and the new Fulton Street mezzanine. So those are the two of the big parts that are in that number.
Any other? Chuck?
How do you determine and test the valuation of assets such as moving or rolling stock, property, and the like? You place an asset value on the bus stock that you have. You put, how do you test it?
What we have in the financial statements is not a market value. What we have in the
That's
financial
what I wanna
statements
know. Yeah, the
is,
book.
it's book value, which is historical value, so we put it on the books at the cost that we expended for it at that time, and then we depreciate it at, life schedule. So it is totally historic. Book value.
That's what I wanted to
Yeah.
know. Right.
Okay, any other questions?
I would just like to, Pat, flip to the next page, and I want the board to see this next page. This is a roll forward of the amount of debt we have, the amount of debt that we issue this past year, the amount of debt that we're retiring, and our new debt position. And I would just point to the two columns right in the middle. Issued at the bottom, we issued about $2.7, $2.8 billion of debt last year, and we retired about 1.3. We paid off, out of operating revenues, about 1.3. We have a big capital program. The capital program grows, but I do want you to know that we are paying down a significant amount of debt every year, and I just would point that out on this chart.
Chuck?
Correct me if I'm wrong. If the capital plan is approved to the extent and in the amount requested, the outstanding debt would be on the order of magnitude of $55 billion?
I don't know how much debt will end up being in the capital plan. That's all I can say right now is we're anticipating about $7 billion of new debt going into the capital plan. What we have said publicly is if we don't fund the next capital plan, ignore that, but the current capital that we have, by the time we get to 2019, 2020, I believe the amount of debt that we'd have outstanding would be somewhere close to $39 billion, $38 billion. So the debt will continue to increase almost by what you see here between the difference in these two columns. Again, we're adding $2.5, $2.7 billion a year, and we're retiring about half of that every year. So
doesn't it lead to a clarion call, if you will? Was I stepping on you?
No.
Doesn't that provide a clarion call to two things? One, that we can no longer validly and fairly rely on fare box revenue as a basis for the provision of adequate mass public transportation to continue this region as the empire region of the United States? And secondly, doesn't it also indicate a need to provide assurances as soon as possible that the capital plan will be authorized and that the various funding partners are going to be there to make available the funds to make it work?
as a person who will always tell you the truth, You know, I will always tell you the truth. As
I
a
warn
person
my
who-
daughter
as-
about people who say things like that, so please.
As a person who may not always be the most politic, I'm going to have to be careful. A capital program that is funded with debt will always put more burden on fares and tolls to the extent that that debt isn't supported by new increased revenues from another source. As I said on Monday, I'm hopeful that our funding partners are going to come together and help create a plan to fund this in a way that will minimize any additional pressure to our customers. We just have to wait and see how our funding partners come together with us to meet the need.
Can I just do one further question to you? Is there any material that is generally available that shows the value added that we provide to communities throughout the state of New York and indeed the region by the existence of mass transit in that area? So, for example, the obvious fact that a Second Avenue subway will increase the property values on Second Avenue and thereby generate additional monies by way of tax revenues for the city of New York. The transit-oriented developments on Long Island benefit the tax rolls of the local towns and villages where they are located. Collection of that data that is generally available?
Yeah, there are a number of studies that have been done recently by the Urban Land Institute, Citizen Budget Commission, KPMG did studies that really does show that transit increases the value of real estate. It also increases the opportunity for businesses because businesses now have a larger pool of potential employees that they can draw upon and customers that they can draw upon. So I think investment in transit is clearly proven to be a wise investment.
Could you let me have the citation to any one of those that you
Yes,
have regarded well?
We will put that information up. We'll give you citations, and we'll make sure that information is available to all board members as well as to the public.
Neil?
Jim, two things. One, maybe for Chuck, you can give him the reports that you shared with me in December, which were the fantastic, I think it were 2006 or 7 studies that were done in terms of county by county, what kind of activity is generated by mass transit. I thought that was a very useful study, although probably benefits by being updated at some point. My question, it's a bit of a departure from what Chuck was talking about, and maybe it's more for the Finance Committee, and I apologize for not having raised it on Monday, having not been there. I want to ask a question which is almost rhetorical. I'm not asking for an answer now, but I want to start figuring how we have a dialogue about it, because I don't know the answer to the question. I think there's an analytical answer to it that takes some time. But we're at $35 billion of debt. You add on post-employment, you get to $47 billion. You take, if you say, I'm just going to take the debt service, the interest payments over the consumer revenue, you're at like 17% of the consumer revenue funds it. There is probably some academic or analytical answer that says there's a ceiling, not a legislative ceiling, but a financially prudent ceiling for how much debt an entity of ours can handle. Private companies live off those debt ratios, and government entities, some don't live off those ratios, like our federal government. We just keep adding more, and various foreign partners fund those debts, but we're a different entity. And so I'd love to start the conversation about what is that point where the debt becomes unmanageable relative to a bunch of considerations, whether it be the consumer revenue, whether it be the non-permanent taxes, whether that be tied to rating implications where we risk our rating. But what is that number we have, and how far out is it? It reminds me of the movie The Right Stuff, where they used to talk about how Chuck Yeager wanted to get to Mach 1, and there's that demon out there. They used to talk about in the movie, the demon. Where's that demon, and what happens when you hit Mach 1? So for me, there's a point where I don't know what that number is, but how close are we to that number? What is that number, and where do we get nervous about it? Because I don't know if $34 billion is the number. I don't know if it's 70 billion? I don't know what it is.
That's not the important number.
Go ahead.
The important number, forgive me, the important number is what proportion of our operating budget does the servicing of that debt consume?
Well, we're at 1.358 billion of interest payments over a total amount of revenue of $14 billion. So you're at 10%. And so that's an answer to that.
Yeah, what I would really say, and I think that's what Commissioner Farrar was getting to, is the real question is what's the burden on our customer? That's the real question. If the state were to, or the state or the city, and again, whatever funding partner we're talking about, if any party took a revenue stream, bonded against it, and just gave us the proceeds of the money, then we'd have no debt service. The debt service would be somewhere else, and then our percentage of, would go down. Conversely, if they give us sustainable, reliable, predictable revenues and then tell us to bond it, well, that's not my preference, because then it's our debt. But if they give us a revenue stream, whoever they are, if they give us a revenue stream that will support it, then that's not a concern for me. The real concern is always, what is the risk to our customers by taking on additional debt? Okay, and that's really, as the Commissioner said, that's really, when you get down to it, that's the real issue.
It requires you to make choices in your operating budget. Again, puts upward pressure on fares and tolls and downward pressure on service. I mean,
So if restated, if the question is restated that way, where is that demon? How far out is that from where we are now? And I don't know the answer, because there's a lot of academic methodologies one could take to try and guesstimate it, but and I'm not, again, it's rhetorical, I'm not asking for an answer today, I just want to start the dialogue about where that is.
Bob, let me make a point. Well, the information you supply and the questions that Freddie and Neil ask and the answers they obtain are informative, to say the very least. I think we have to translate it to those who may be listening to this or may be writing something based on it. Correct me if I may, if I'm oversimplifying it. The debt that we incur requires the payment of interest to carry that debt. That the payment of that interest is a diminution of the amount of money that we have to provide service on the basis of the revenues, whether fare box or otherwise, that we now obtain. And as we have to increase that rather than getting a clear stream of money to do it, the public is in a position, the riding public, that it faces an increased possibility of having to pony up either directly at the fare box or through the funding partners. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to move on. We got 70% of our agenda still to come, so we haven't got much time. Okay, Lamont, you're on.
All right. Thank you. Each year, this committee has asked that I report on our efforts to ensure compliance by all individuals at the MTA who are required to file a financial disclosure statement with the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. This year, the MTA has just over 6,000 employees or other individuals who are required to file. We have, at this point, reached out via the memos in your board book to every single one of those employees, reminding them of their obligation to file. In addition, we've also made a special appeal to any employee who has been late in the past to make sure that they are on time this year with their filings. And later in the year, we will also provide a training session for our employees who may be having difficulty figuring out how to file or fill out their financial disclosure statement. As of this time, we have not been notified by the Joint Commission of any employee who was delinquent in their filings for last year. However, I do not believe that will remain the case. I assume at some point this year we will be notified of some delinquency. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I will anticipate that, and if so,
I will notify this committee of that fact.
Okay. Any questions?
Not a question, but I want you to be aware that the request to file came to my junk mail, and I think I'm hearing from other board members that they haven't seen it yet. So,
The notice from the Joint Commission? Yeah, it comes from a very unusual email account. It says Ethel@jcob. Okay. Well, I will tell you that if any of you are having a problem, that's what I'm here for. Just reach out to me. I can get you the information where you can bypass the email and go directly into file. I'm available for you at any point.
Should we have received it by now?
I received it on April the 16th.
You should have received an email. It would have come from Ethel. So a lot of junk mail filters block Ethel. But again, you don't need the email to actually file. So I will give you the link. I will email you the link so that you can go in and file. And if you have any problems, you can reach out to me. Okay?
Any other questions? Okay. Okay. Next on the agenda is Michael Gardner, Chief Diversity Officer. Oh, we skipped one part.
Yeah, got one more.
Right.
Each year, I provide this committee with a report on MTA's Ethics and Compliance Program. The first slide in your book, I believe it's on page 475, just lays out the basic structure of our program. Again, it is based on a concept called GRC, Governance, Risk, and Compliance. Our program integrates our corporate governance, our ethics, our internal controls, our compliance, our regulatory disclosure, and our investigation functions in a coordinated method. On the next page, oh, okay, they put the slide up. We'll give this a try. Okay. Good. On the next page, you'll see that last year, corporate compliance, which is a department within headquarters, handled over 400 ethics and compliance issues. These were issues that were significant enough to record and track within our systems. Many of them are received via email, telephone calls, via our ethics helpline, and we also receive quite a few what we call walk-ins, individuals or employees who have a question and just come in and decide to wait and get their questions answered. Numerous issues including attendance at prohibited source events, outside activity approvals, gifts, financial disclosure, reimbursement for travel expenses, political activities, and acceptance of honoraria. One of the things that we had started last year and will continue this year is an expansion of our compliance training program on some requirements that we had received from Albany. We have added new courses to our compliance training program. These will be annual trainings that will be given to our employees and certain contractors as well. In addition, this year we will be rolling out what we call annual policy certifications. It will all be done electronically at this point, requiring that certain policies be certified by our employees on an annualized basis. We continue our communication efforts. Our Code of Ethics is distributed on a regular basis. It's available both on the intranet and our intranet. It is translated and it is given to all new employees. The code is reviewed on a regular basis by the Governance Committee, and it is updated on a regular basis. Part of our communication plan, each month, the MTA Today is dedicated to ethics and compliance issues. We provide guidance, and we also attempt to infuse a little humor in the process by providing entertaining videos and then providing an example of what our employees should have done rather than what the individuals usually do in the videos. We are also distributing two publications. One is called Ethicos, the other is Tone at the Top. These are emailed to senior managers on an ongoing basis. We also provide copies of both of these publications in Director's Desk. If you go to your document section within Director's Desk, you will see that we provide that for you as well. We continue to provide our employees with memoranda regarding public officers law, our Code of Ethics, holiday gift
memos, political activities, honoraria, any specific events that may come up, updated information that we may receive from the Joint Commission, and, of course, financial disclosure. We continue to use signage to encourage our employees to utilize our ethics helpline. That signage goes up throughout the organization. And finally, our program would not be a success without the coordination with many individuals. Very important to the program are the agency ethics officers, our relationship with the Inspector General, Audit Services, our continuing work with the training departments on rolling out the compliance training, the support of the legal department, human resources, and of course, corporate communications and our partners in Albany. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Chuck?
Lamond, I think I would be remiss if I did not make the point that you run a superb operation for the benefit of the public and for the benefit of this board and agency. It is flawless. And my only question to you is the following. Would there be a useful purpose served in providing some educational tool, training or otherwise, in terms of defining what is a conflict and how do you deal with it? Simple question, and yet very hard to answer.
It truly is, because oftentimes what is a conflict, or sometimes more importantly, what generates the appearance of a conflict is very fact-specific. And that's why we have agency ethics officers and myself who do spend quite a bit of time coming to those very hard decisions which do impact our employees about, not what is a conflict, but what just might be an appearance of a conflict and therefore damage the reputation of this organization.
And my point really is those folk who come in brand new, whether out of school or off the street or wherever, it seems to me a useful purpose might well be served in, at the very outset, giving them some illustrative background as to how to come to a conclusion. Hopefully, most of them have a good moral compass,
Right.
but that compass may from time to time need reorientation.
Within 90 days of hire, all employees are required who are financial disclosure filers, who are policymakers, to have ethics training within 90 days of being hired.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Lamont.
Thank you.
Okay. Michael Garner, Chief Diversity Officer, will provide the committee with a status of the compliance monitoring and performance measures. You might bring up the IG also? Sure.
Thank you for having me at today's meeting. Barry Kluger, Inspector General. What I'm here to talk about today is a report that will be published today regarding compliance monitoring at DDCR. Just a bit of background to this report. I'm sure you're all aware that for a number of years we've been working extensively in the area of DBE and MWBE fraud with our investigative partners at the United States Attorney's Office, both in the Southern District and the Eastern District, as well as presently a number of cases with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Those primarily dealt with both prime contractors and subcontractors making use of pass-throughs, which in effect defraud our MBE and WMBE programs that have resulted in a number of settlements with those contractors. There have been some convictions. There have been deferred prosecution agreements. And there also have been a number of non-prosecution agreements that have resulted in substantial fines, penalties, and the institution of both monitors and assessors so that those companies can continue to work on our project. DDCR, and Mr. Garner in particular, has been very cooperative, his office, in those investigations. That being said, however, we felt that it was important for us to review DDCR's compliance monitoring programs that are important in the areas of detecting and deterring some of this fraud from the outset and to ensure compliance with our own policies and both our obligation under federal guidelines and statutes, both with the FTA and some of the state reporting requirements. Today, we are publishing the first of those reports, this one regarding compliance monitoring. We are also working, again, with Mr. Garner's cooperation, the area of participation monitoring and the certification of some of these contractors from the outset. If I can talk to a summary of the recommendations that are contained in this first report, we were particularly looking at the areas of site visits, verification of subcontractor payments, and closeout of existing contracts. A number of months ago, with the cooperation of Mr. Garner, the Auditor General, and Lamont Kearse, we have been working closely to ensure that we do a better job in the areas of on-site inspections. And sort of a summary of those recommendations include that DDCR must regularly conduct on-site inspections, verify subcontractor performance payments, and obtain critical documentation. DDCR must also promptly finish its own case closeouts to assess contractor compliance with all MWDBE requirements on completed contracts and address its own backlog in this area. We believe that DDCR should develop and use performance measures in tracking these critical tasks. They should more fully implement its contract management system and create and apply to each department case file a uniform case tracking chart providing a current snapshot of each contractor's compliance with all MWDBE requirements. And the final recommendation from this report, which has been implemented by our presence here today, is that DDCR should report on its compliance monitoring to the Audit Committee and of the MTA Board. I'm happy to note, and you can read this report, and the report does speak for itself, but I must say that I have seen over the last 6 months, we have been reviewing our findings and recommendations with Mr. Garner and his top staff over the last 6 months, and I can report to this committee, as you'll probably get into now, that there has been significant improvement in these 3 key areas to ensure that we are in the best position possible to deter and detect this fraud from the outset and to ensure compliance with our statutory obligations. Thank you.
Chuck?
I want to see if I understand this completely. DDCR sets forth percentage requirements for the employers or subcontractors to utilize the services of minorities, women, and other defined MBWEs. And it sets those forth. And are you telling me that DDCR then has the burden to undertake the inspections to measure compliance rather than the Inspector General's office?
No, I'm not telling you that. I work on these investigations.
Well, that's what I
There
want
is
to be
some
clear.
primary responsibility. My office has never been charged with the initial certification. That is a whole process that I believe Mr. Garner can address. That the initial review of a contractor that he meets the requirement of being a DBE or an MWBE is done through a site inspection by that office. Historically, the whole issue of verification of subcontractor payments is done through our internal systems, hopefully now with a little further assistance from the BSC. As Mr. Garner can probably outline to you, there have been some issues with Skyline computer system. He can further address those issues. We have worked cooperatively on this. Our office has never been charged with that responsibility of the initial certification. That has always been done in-house. Our responsibility is on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, in our office, both in terms of audit and investigation, to work independently and then with our investigative partners to detect which we do with our construction fraud unit, work with our investigative partners, and turn to Mr. Garner for his assistance in terms of the files that we have regarding those
So
contractors.
that your office has the responsibility essentially of oversight, correct?
That is correct, as well as our investigative responsibility, our audit responsibility, and because of our intensive work in the criminal area or in the investigative area, we felt it was important, obviously regarding the millions of dollars that come. Some of this has also come as a result of Sandy oversight, and we felt that we should work. Historically, over the last few years, all of us have been working in this area, and specifically the Auditor General has looked into this area, and we've worked with Lamont and very closely with Mr. Garner, who I'm happy to say has been most cooperative during this process.
And
think we
indeed, you
should,
have taken matters to federal and state prosecutors to commence proceedings for those who do not comply,
That is correct.
particularly in the construction industry. Am I correct?
That is it.
I think we should let Mike start his program. We can question him afterwards. Mike?
Thank you, and good morning. And I want to just start out by thanking Barry Kluger, Beth Warren, and his staff for working with us to identify weaknesses in our MWDB contract compliance area. I also want to thank Mike Fusilli and his staff, Ben Launer, Michelle Woods, and Mike Prada, in giving us resources since August of 2014, which this actual presentation is going to show that there's been a spike of project closeouts. We all share the same goal here, is making sure that not only taxpayers' monies are spent in an inclusive manner, but taxpayers' monies are spent in a cost-effective manner as well. The goals assigned are going to be the goals achieved, and we need to improve our MWDBE contract compliance in order to ensure that the goals that's been assigned are the goals are achieved, and to root out MWDBE fraud. Basically, we are going to report to you this morning, monitoring reporting, the status of the IG's recommendations.
Michael, could you please put the presentation up? Thank you.
The metrics, the new contract compliance system that we are working with the governor's office, and updated policy revisions. Naeem Din is going to take you through I'm going to close out, and I'm going to be here to answer questions.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Naeem Din, Deputy Director for the MTA Department of Diversity and Civil Rights. The slide that you have is up there is a summary of active contracts that we have as. Can you hear me now? That is as of the end of first quarter 2015. As you know, we have federally funded contracts and we have state-funded contracts. In terms of federally funded contracts with gold, there were 176, and 463 for the state-funded contracts with MWBE goals. There is an overall DBE goal of 17% for the federally funded contracts, and as of March 31st, that's the end of the state fiscal year, our goal was 20%. For the upcoming state fiscal years, which started on April 1st, the goal is going to be close to 30%. There are individual goals on contracts which are determined based on the availability of DBEs or MWBEs. The next page talks about the IG recommendations. So these are topics which are related to the recommendations made by the Inspector General. First one is to establish performance metrics. This is in progress. We're developing a reliable system for measuring our effectiveness in monitoring contract compliance. The second one is revised standard operating procedures to verify subcontracted payments, for instance. This is in progress, and we expect to complete that by June. The first one is expected by the end of the year, the second one to be expected by the end of June. We have increased site visits. Currently, managers perform 6 to 8 site visits per month. We have also adjusted our payment verification systems to verify payments which are made to MWDBEs. As Mike mentioned, we have established a comprehensive list of contracts for final closeout with assistance from the MTA Audit Services staff. We established protocols for contract closeouts. This is the agencies notifying us when our contracts are closed so that we can then proceed to close our contracts internally. This is to be expected by June 2015, the establishment of protocols, that is. And as the Inspector General mentioned, we are reporting now to the Audit Committee, and I believe the next one will be in September. We are also in the process of improving our records management and establishing procedures that govern the records that we keep and maintain. We have also implemented improved tracking system for compliance with the MWDB goals. And we're also have improved our contract compliance system for tracking modules for things such as site visits and closing out contracts. Next page. The areas of performance. We have completed 77% of site visits. As far as on closed contracts, we have verified 268 million. That breaks out to 105 million for DBEs and 163 million for MWBEs. And for subcontract agreements, thus far we have achieved about 83% of the subcontract agreements that we have received. The next page gives us a snapshot of the inactive contracts. So total of 196 contracts were reviewed and closed by mid-April. And 62 of them were administratively closed for being contracts which were over 7 years old.
Can I stop you at that point? What do you mean by closed?
Closed means that basically we are aware that the agency had closed out the contract, which sets in place our motion of doing our MWDBE payment verification to the MWDBE subcontractors. So we currently have a manual process now. Then the manual process is that once that project is closed, we will send mail, fax, or email a payment verification form. The MWDBE firm will then fill out the form, send it back to us. That's how we verifying the
Do you have an interim verification process?
Yes, so basically our policy says that at the 30, 60, and 90% project completion, we should verify MWDB payments. That's a very, very arduous process, and we're going to improve the process because we're now going to hire outside consulting called B2G. The 96 state agencies, we're all going to use the same software system. Now what's going to be required is the contractor is going to be required to indicate their payments to MWDB firms in a portal, and the MWDBE contractors will then go into the same portal and verify the payment.
I'm getting the sickening sense that this is all done by computer and audit of paper rather than eyes on the scene to make sure that there are real people doing real work that are really qualified, except to the extent that the IG...
So that's not true, Chuck. And
that's what I want you to say.
Right, definitely. It's not true. So basically, we are also, and it's in the presentation, we are also working with Lamont Kears, Mike and his staff, and the CPM at the operating agencies to clearly define the roles of my MWDB staff and the project manager who's on site every day. And so as the IG indicated, we will then schedule site visits when the MWDBE firms are working, go on site and observe, and then garner documentation which verifies that MWDBE subcontractor is there performing a function and that they're performing work in the certification area in which they're certified in.
Michael, let me, and forgive me if I may, this governor, like his predecessor, David Paterson and Andrew Cuomo, have been insistent on maximizing this area, and as you can see in the chart, the state has a higher percentage requirement for state contracts than even the federal government. And my concern is simply this, and if you lack the manpower to do it or the means within which to do it, or the IG lacks the manpower or the means to do it, I think we need to know it. Somebody's got to be sure that we're not just looking at paper reports. People have eyes on the ground to make sure that there is interim compliance rather than protestations of compliance that are formalistic.
If I may address that for a second, it's not just a matter of paper compliance, both by Mike's office and our office in terms of the investigation. You have preliminary site visits where there had been an improvement. Yes, they had lagged behind in the initial area for the initial certifications and the recertifications that I believe are due every year or 2 years. But at the same time, our office does go to kickoff meetings. We do our own site visits, both based on our own intuition and pursuant to investigations. We have an outreach program where members of my office actually meet with our CMs and our CCMs, because it's got to be a concentrated effort. It's not just Mike's job, it's not just my job.
Contract manager.
Our project managers, our contract managers, that they also have a responsibility in terms of being the eyes and the ears to this fraud, all right, that is going on, where companies are being utilized as pass-throughs who are not performing a commercially useful function. So what we've seen, and we've had that over the years, in terms of that coordination, it's been improved upon. Actually, one of our attorneys spends a lot of time. We're also out there right now in terms of site visits on construction sites on Sandy rehabilitation, pursuant to our joint responsibility with the Auditor General to be able to ensure the FTA that we're doing the particular oversight. So the eyes and ears are out there. Mike has a responsibility. I have a responsibility that I believe pursuant to my responsibility in this area. And we have also met with CPM contractors, capital construction contractors, and there is a visibility out there. But as you can see from this report, for a while there had been a lag behind in some of these areas. There also has to be more verification in-house and not totally be reliant on the contractors and subcontractors, in effect self-reporting on the area of verification of payments. So there has also been now dialogue further with the BSC to make sure that we can have the backup verification that in fact this payment submissions are accurate. So there's a lot of working parts to this effort. There has been continued cooperation, and I thank that as an independent office that it's there. And these recommendations in this area and 2 other areas that I'll mention at the end of the presentation, there has been an excellent spirit of cooperation to correct some of these shortcomings.
Mr. Kluger, a question for you. I'm both as a relatively new board member and a disabled veteran. I read your report and I'm frankly stunned by some of the adjectives used about what you've observed and your folks have observed. But I am a relatively new board member, and so I'd like you to help me calibrate the tone of this report against other reports you've done in your tenure. I'm not asking you to give it a number, but can you give us a comparison or qualification of the tone and severity of these findings versus other things you look at? Is this run-of-the-mill in terms of findings? Is this extreme? Is this mild? Can you just help me calibrate the report relative to other things you see, please?
That's probably a tough question to answer. Look, I feel that I have a responsibility pursuant to my statute to not make myself an umpire, to call it as I see it. There are times when someone can read a report, the eyes of the beholder in terms of reading it. Yes, there is some strong language here because I believe that this is a very important area. And I'm not going to water down our findings and our recommendations. I believe that it's important for us to get a message across. Some of our reports may be perceived as stronger, some may be perceived as weaker, but I think that what I've had, and as a new board member, I'm very pleased that whatever tone is interpreted from our reports, I would say over the years that I've been the Inspector General here, I have had the cooperation, of the agencies. And one of my, I guess, favorite statements, hopefully not overused on some of the report, is while what I find, and I'm not saying I find this disturbing, but one of the phrases, if I think that something is disturbing and should have been attended to a little more closely, I will say it. But I also will say when I'm encouraged and I realize that I'm not getting pushback from this and that people are acting responsibly. We've been working very closely with Mr. Garner and his shop for the last 6 months to be able to have these improvements. So I don't know if that answers your question, but if you look at our reports, you'll interpret them in different ways.
I think the important thing that we take away from these reports is what actions are being taken to correct the issues and how strong our program is or is not. So I would like to hear the rest of the presentation so I get a better sense as to what's being accomplished here, if you would mind.
Okay, for the next page shows how the progress we made since August of 2014 to mid-April. Slide after that shows projections for completion of the inactive contract that were identified, so the projection is for April of 2016, but we hope to complete that before that target date.
Go back to your previous slide. So since with the added resources that was lent to us by Audit Services, we closed out 258 projects since August, and you see that as a spike as going up. Next one. And as Naeem indicated, that basically in going forward, we are extremely optimistic that we are going to be finished closing out this backlog before April of 2016. And so we are focused. We have dedicated more resources from Audit Services. It is our goal here is to eradicate this backlog by 12/31, if not sooner.
Okay, the next slide, the new contract compliance system, contract compliance system, the B2G system, which is currently being used by the New York State agencies and authorities. We expect to implement this by the end of this year, and this will enable us to track and monitor goal compliance as well as payments that are made. The contractors will be able to report directly their payments into the state system, and the subcontractors will be able to verify confirmed payments that they have received. Lastly is the policy revision. We are working closely with MTA Corporate Compliance as well as the MTA Audit Services, and we will be working with agency staff, especially the CPM staff, to review and revise our current all-agency policy directive regarding MWDB compliance, and this will accurately define the role and responsibilities of our agency, of our department and the MTA agencies, as well as help us secure and enhance compliance with all the applicable federal rules and regulations.
Next steps is going to be to fully implement all of the MTA's IG recommendations, to also complete hiring of staff. There's at this present point in time, we have 9 vacancies, and we're working with HR in order to hire competent staff. We are going to implement this new B2G system, which is going to allow us to stop chasing paper on a monthly basis, and innovate and automate our contract compliance, MWDB payment verifications, review and issue the revised all-agency policy, and the last one is update the audit committee on progress. Our next date here is going to be September, and I can guarantee you it's going to be a more clear picture for improvements with respect to closeouts, site visits, MWDBE contract
payment verifications. Lastly, I just want to once again thank Barry Kluger and Beth Warren and his staff. I also want to thank Mike and his staff, because in order for us to fix this, it's going to take an institutional approach with all of our external partners, including compliance. And I'm here to tell you today that we're going to fix this.
Michael, with the exception of the update, the audit committee on the progress, do you have an expected time frame for getting through the rest of these bullets?
The bullets, yes, we do, and we can update that, and we can either send it to you or we can update you in September. And I'm very optimistic by September we're going to have a lot of these items closed.
Have you gotten the information you want before I'm disturbed for a reason, and I'm not faulting you. You are trying to change a culture. You are trying to affect change, and that's all to the good. But as I hear your report and I read the detailed report of the Inspector General, I have a question. If you take subcontractor participation not verified, the heading in the Inspector General's report on page 7, it indicates that while DDC asks subcontractors to return the confirmatory forms within 24 hours, DDC did not confirm any subcontractor participation in 59% of the contracts in the sample. Then you take an issue of subcontractor payments not being verified, and I go through this, and I get a picture. Let me try and convey that picture. People like Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner Metzger have been working for a long time and arduously to maximize the opportunities for MBWE. Governor Patterson did it. Governor Cuomo is doing it. And my concern is we can appear to require 20% or 17% or any percentage that you may deem appropriate for a given contract. But unless there are eyes around to see that there is compliance, I'm not sure we're going to get it. What I saw in this presentation here a moment ago is a very heavy reliance on computerized paper data or electronic data. That is the old story of garbage in and garbage out. If you receive information from those who work on these projects that is faulty, you're going to only be able to pass on faulty information. That troubles me. And so what I would ask you to do, if you don't mind, is to spend even more time, if you can, with Barry Kluger and his folk in terms of trying to maximize the inspectional and visual end of this reporting and not rely as heavily, or maybe not exclusively, upon electronic or paper reporting. I know that's your objective, but I'd like to see it.
Right. I'm in agreement, and moving forward, Barry and our respective staffs are going to work together. This is the classic case of a small emerging business. Small emerging business, and I'm in agreement with you that we have been aligned with both Governor Patterson and Andrew Cuomo to maximize opportunities. We have maximized opportunities. So it's like a small emerging business who gets increased revenue, and their back office is not fully staffed up, or basically the infrastructure is not there. So we are going to work as an organization in order to fix this along with the operating agencies, and also to make sure that we have competent staff, and also work in conjunction with other internal stakeholders to, one, fix this problem, and two, to make sure that next year's time we're not sitting here having the same conversation.
Michael, when are we going to hear from you and Barry again on this subject, or with the Diversity Committee hearing?
That they're going to report back to us in September. I also know that they are making use of our Auditor General. We have three of his people are now working with them to try to bring them up to date. So I feel confident that we're on the right track. But at the same time, we need to see better results.
If I may, just some final notes. I want to assure everybody in response to your question and everybody else's, we will continue, as we always do in our reports, to monitor the success in implementing the recommendations. So I'll be back here in September to give you my opinion on whether we're continuing on the right track that's been started over the last few months. Also, probably before September, as I mentioned at the outset, there's two other areas that are review. One is shortly to be completed. One is participation reporting. That is the final review of the accuracy of the data on contractor and performance meeting its goals, that it's collected, stored, and reported properly by DDCR. I have received Michael's acceptance of our findings and recommendations in that area. That will be worked on very shortly, and we are also in the middle of a review of the processing of the initial certification of these contractors as being part of our program and performing a commercially beneficial use. So you will get all those reports from me sometime between now and September.
Sue.
Michael, I know the pride that you take in this program. I share that pride. And I know that finding these failures must have been very painful for you, as it is painful for those of us who have worked on diversity. I also understand the difficulty that you have in tracking nearly 4,000 subcontracts with staff. I understand that you will continue to use the services that are being provided by our Auditor General. I understand that you're having a new program that hopefully will help cut through. I also understand that you are, to some extent, reaching out to the project managers in the agencies who see what's on the ground every day and bringing them in to help you, because that's what has to happen. You are ultimately responsible, and we hold you responsible. We will hold you responsible in September when you come back here, and we will continue to hold you responsible at the diversity meetings, because I want to see these numbers improve, but I also want to see the number of contracts increased until we've absolutely met every. I have confidence that you will do that.
Okay.
Thank you, and you and this whole entire board has been extremely supportive. And as sure as I'm sitting here right now, one, I take full responsibility for this. Two, we are going to fix this as an organization.
Okay. I need a motion to go into executive session. In there.